Welcome to episode 22 of Feeling Through Live. I'm joined here today by Will Butler from Be My Eyes. The title of this episode is appropriately named Be My Eyes. And Will, we got a lot to talk about today, but let's talk about the elephant in the room here, or rather just the title on the screen. Why don't you tell everyone what Be My Eyes is?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Doug. It's good to be here, and yeah, I'm really excited to share a little bit about what we do and talk about your movie because it's such an excellent piece of work as well. The film
Thank
that
you.
So Be My Eyes is a Danish invention. It was this app that it was basically dreamed up by this Danish guy who has retinitis pigmentosa. So he's got a degenerative eye condition. And about 6-7 years ago, around the time that video chat became pretty popular on mobile devices, he realized that he could actually make a video call to anybody and point the camera and they could describe whatever he was looking at or having trouble seeing. And so he thought to himself, this is really great, but what if I don't want to just call the same, couple of friends and family all the time? What if I could kind of do this at scale? And he realized, every time I go out on the street, all these people are trying to help me, cross the street or do things that I might not necessarily need help with. But when I do need help is when people aren't looking, when he's by himself, trying to tell the difference between a can of tomatoes or a can of coconut milk, and you don't want to open it up and smell it to find out. So Be My Eyes was born, this idea that you could press a button and a random volunteer somewhere in the world who was available would answer within a few seconds, look through your phone camera and describe whatever it is you were looking at, and then you could go on with your day. And that's what was created. When we launched the app 5 years ago, it was very it was a big unknown. We had no idea how many people were going to sign up, what the response was going to be. Frankly, we were worried that more visually impaired people were going to sign up than volunteers, and we would have this outsized demand and people would be mad because they weren't getting help, but kind of the opposite happened. We had about 10,000 volunteers sign up in the first 24 hours, about 1,000 blind users. And so we developed this really great ratio, about 20-1 of volunteers to users, so that every time a user places a Be My Eyes call, kind of like Uber or Lyft, we ping about 20 people at a time. And whoever is most available will be the first person to answer and be able to be the eyes of the person who needs help looking at something. So that's what it does. Yeah.
And obviously that great description there. And I'll be the person on the outside of this being a little bit more of the fanboy of it, saying like, if you haven't used this app, you should download it immediately. It's Will, when we first connected, I told you I was kind of nerding out a little bit because I was like, independently from meeting you, well before it, I had read about Be My Eyes, downloaded, and was like really excited about not just the functionality of it, but also just kind of the community that you guys have really built around it, and we'll certainly get into that a little bit more. But I mean, just from a personal standpoint, what I was so impressed with was like kind of what you were saying. There was this initial concern that, oh, we're going to have so many people needing to use this and not enough volunteers to make it work. But it being so much the opposite, that as someone who's a volunteer on it, I've been on it for like well over a year. I've hardly ever gotten any notifications because there's just so many volunteers. And the few times I have gotten a notification, I've like sprinted to my phone, tried to get it, and like just missed out because another volunteer has gotten it, which first and foremost is so cool in and of itself that there's so many people that make it work so well. But on the other hand, I think it's so cool that like I've signed up for something to volunteer my time, right? Quote unquote, volunteer my time. And I'm like super bummed that I miss out on this volunteer opportunity. And to create that kind of enthusiasm for people who are like quote unquote volunteering their time is like, there's very few things that I feel like create that level of enthusiasm to like volunteer your time for.
Yeah, well, I think where Be My Eyes slipped in is there was a gap between um, the amount of people who really genuinely wanted to help and the opportunities to help. Like I remember when I was in college and I was kind of newly blind, if I wanted to have course material accessible to me, it was like a process. It was like I had to either purchase, a $700 flatbed scanner and expensive software and learn how to use the software and then learn how to, scan it and convert it, or walk physically down to the disabled student's office, find the group there that converts books into accessible formats, have them literally cut the spine off of the book, um, and scan it through their software, return it to me, put it onto a CD then I would take home and put into my computer, sometimes just so that I could read like one chapter of a book. And 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 in a world where like we as blind people are like 1% or 1 to 3%, depending on how you look at it, of the population, and there's so many people who want to contribute to helping us, we really we we really shouldn't have to wait uh, when it comes to overcoming an accessibility barrier. It should be pretty instant. And so that's kind of what we're working on at Be My Eyes. Like we joke that we want to get to a point where we don't need to exist because the accessibility barriers aren't there. But for the ones that are, we want people to be able to overcome them pretty much instantaneously. And we have college students who will, call 13 individual Be My Eyes volunteers in a row and have them each read one page of the chapter. And they're able to get the chapter read in the exact same amount of time that a sighted person would, as opposed to going through that process that I had to go through, 10 years ago, only 9 or 10 years ago.
I have so many things to say to that. But before I do, just a couple questions from people who are watching. Alice Edie, hello, Alice, one of our former guests and amazing president of the Deaf Blind Division of the National Federation for the Blind, asks, she asks, can you access the app with a Braille display?
We haven't like completely figured out support for the I'd love to hear your feedback, Alice. It's one of the reasons why when Doug invited me on, I was really excited to join, because we've done a really good job with connecting with the quote unquote blindness organizations. But as folks may or may not know, it's like the deaf blind organizations and individuals tend to get short shrift on these sorts of things. So I was excited to come on and sort of collect community feedback as well, because it's kind of part of my job is to figure out, what is the best way for us to make Be My Eyes work for people who are deaf, right? Like we have tons of deafblind users who are using it with headphones in and or some degree of amplification. Obviously, people with implants, like we have like a pretty significant deafblind community, and definitely a pretty big hard of hearing group of users, because many of our users are older. But when it comes to things like accessing the app completely non-visually and non-auditorially, I think we could do better. And I think people are always welcome to reach out to me on that front as well. My email address is will@bemyeyes.com. And I'd love to hear from folks like Alice to see about like, who knows, I might be pleasantly surprised, like we might have, our developers in Denmark are really, really conscious about accessibility. So the app itself is 100% accessible. So it may be a pretty good, but I'm more concerned about like, what is the user experience for a Braille Display user? And how do we go about nailing that? Because I don't think we've run a ton of user tests with Braille Display users.
And it is like, again, it seems like a technology, and again, we'll get more into technology in a little bit, but like a technology where there's like a lot of room to keep kind of building it outward to have it accommodate a lot more people. One more question too for right now is Diane Black. Hello, Diane asks, how is the app promoted?
You know, it's really promoted by word of mouth. Um, well, in social media, if you count that as word of mouth, like organic social media, um, we're a small company. We were less than a dozen people for 5 years. Now we're, I think, at 16 or 17, and we run on, we run a tight ship, and we have most of the team in Denmark, just a few people in the United States. And so we don't have big marketing budgets or anything like that. But luckily, we have an idea that resonates with people. So our volunteers, we have more than 4 million volunteers now. And our volunteers evangelize the app. They are constantly talking about it, just in the way that Doug was, telling people they have to download this app. We pop up on the front page of Reddit every couple of weeks or every couple of months. We have social media posts unexpectedly go viral every so often. We had something kind of go crazy on TikTok last week, which got us 100,000 new users. And promoting service to people who are blind or low vision is hard, because people who are blind or low vision tend to be isolated from the typical marketing channels, or if not isolated, just integrated into the general population. And so we found that the way to promote it amongst visually impaired people is to promote it to everybody. Because if you think about it, we have 4 million sighted users and about 250,000 blind users. But statistically, about 250,000 of those sighted users are going to experience a visual impairment at some point in their lives. So we have almost double the blind users in our sighted, if you could think about our sighted community, and the fact that they will eventually need Be My Eyes. And we have heard many, many times already about people saying, can I switch my account? I was a volunteer. I had a great experience. I helped some people. And now I have a visual impairment, and I'd like to switch my account to the other type of account. It's pretty remarkable.
That's so interesting. I think about a lot of times, something in just connecting with a lot of people, say in the deaf blind community, feeling through, I'd heard, for people who maybe became deafblind later in life, and weren't, say, like born with Usher and maybe had an earlier incidence of it, there is this kind of like feeling of psychologically of being like it was something that was very, very foreign until it was something that person was personally experiencing. And it's so interesting to think of, one of kind of maybe the not as obvious benefits of Be My Eyes is that it also kind of creates a direct connection and understanding of a community that many of the volunteers will at some point be directly a part of themselves, and kind of creating like what I can only imagine is like a smoother transition into that, had they not had any kind of direct connection with the blind and low vision community prior to becoming part of that community themselves, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways to put it. I think disability is a really useful concept as an identity thing, and I have a lot of pride in my disability, but I don't think it's very useful for our society as a whole, because it alienates and it others. And I think like everybody has a need for good design, accessible designed things, whether it's because you're blind or deaf, or because you're holding a baby in one arm, or the sun's in your eyes, or you have a limp, or you sprained your ankle, or your arthritis is kicking in. It's like, are those people disabled? Sort of, and I think that I've heard a lot of different versions of this little pithy phrase. Like, I have a friend, Chris Downey, who's a blind architect, who says everybody's got a disability. It's just that some people haven't found theirs yet. I've heard folks at NFB say, National Federation of the Blind, say everybody's blind. Everybody will be blind if they live long enough, which is a little more of a sinister thing, but it's true. I mean, like, everybody experiences visual impairment at some point in their life. The World Health Organization said that 2.2 billion people are experiencing some sort of visual impairment right now, which is like a staggering number. It's almost 30% of the population. So obviously empathy is like really important, and it's important to understand that it's not us who can see and them who cannot. We are all in this we all have this very delicate gift of being able to interpret light with our brain through our eyes, and we can't take it for granted. And for the many people who don't, we need to make the world work for them. So there's a lot of different empathy exercises out there, that many of which sort of miss the mark, and some of them which sort of hit the mark, but it's tough. And you'll hear a lot of people saying like, oh, I totally know where you're at. Like, when I take off my glasses, I'm blind. And it's like, there's just like, people are really, really desperate to feel connected to people with disabilities, but they're not given that many opportunities. So I'd like to think that Be My Eyes gives people an authentic opportunity that's not exploitative. It's a win-win for both parties, truly a win-win for both parties, and doesn't dip too much into like empathy exercises that don't give the individual a ton of information.
Yeah, and kind of to what, and it kind of something that we touched on before, and what that kind of like brings up for me is, one of the things that I think is really great about Be My Eyes and kind of the enthusiasm that's generated around it is that it goes beyond creating something that something that allows for more accessibility. I think it really does create community and like a mutuality of like a benefit, right? Because like I know, in connecting with you before this, I know that there's a lot of people who are a volunteer who are perhaps, to put it in kind of like a cliched way, that much are getting even more benefit from it than the person they're volunteering for, in the sense that I can only imagine this has been amplified during COVID, but obviously there's a lot of people who are isolated, increased loneliness, and something like this is a technology that not only allows to increase accessibility, but really just connection. I mean, I'm sure you've probably gotten a number of stories like that throughout time, but I can only imagine more so over the last 6 months.
Absolutely. People are incredibly eager right now to find a volunteer opportunity that resonates with them and makes them feel like they're being effective at home or wherever they are. And yeah, if anything, our the task that we need to figure out is how to provide more opportunities for all these wonderful volunteers who have signed up to do more. I think there is an element to it of people like that there's no obligation. I think that we live in a time where you should be able to kind of make your own schedule and do things your own way. That's kind of expected at this point. And so I think it's good that we never force any volunteer to do anything. So we're going to try to maintain that and keep it casual and keep it like fun. Everyone knows that as soon as you start being expected to do something regularly, it kind of loses its fun. But yeah, I've been trying really hard to build community, because 12 years ago, when I lost a lot of my vision, I didn't know any people who were blind. I had no reference point. I had no bookmark, nothing like, no foothold for what visual impairment was all about. And I was listening to podcasts, I was searching the internet. Stuff wasn't out there. There were no blind YouTubers like there are today. There were no blind podcasts like there are today. It was a pretty obscure corners of the internet where you could find information about blindness. And it wasn't stuff that was appealing to an 18-year-old kid. So we're trying to engage with that as a brand and as a company to try to, we put out multiple podcasts. We have community calls a couple times a month where we have hundreds of blind people from around the world talking to each other on the line. We have, we produce a lot of content that tries to bring people together as a community, and we're constantly thinking critically about how can we make this the biggest blind community in the world really a community and not just like a nameless, faceless user base,
And not only are there a couple podcasts associated with Be My Eyes, but you are the host of said podcasts.
Yeah. I don't know why I do this to myself. we started one podcast. I was like, this is going so well. I'm so busy. Let's start another one.
But why don't you just let people know who are watching and interested what those are called and where they can find them?
Yeah, so you can go to BeMyEyes.com/podcasts. And there are two podcasts there. One is called the Be My Eyes podcast, and that is entirely interviews with blind and low vision people who really, my only criteria is, are they blind or low vision, and are they passionate about what they do? That's basically it. I just want to show as many different perspectives as possible on what it means to be blind, and we've interviewed, world travelers, PhD chemists, the president of the NFB, folks from other organizations. We're bringing on folks from the ACB. We've got, just like real sort of like trying to have really meaty discussions about what it means to be blind in today's world and how you get by and all the different ways of getting by, because there are so many different perspectives. So that's the Be My Eyes podcast. Then there's a podcast called 13 Letters, the accessibility podcast. It's 13 Letters. And 13 Letters is kind of a joke about the word accessibility and how sort of inaccessible the word accessibility is. It's like a 13-letter word. And so it's basically just all about inclusive design and physical and digital accessibility. We interview a lot of folks from companies who are designing things to be more accessible to people with disabilities. And I co-host that with an accessibility engineer from Salesforce. And I'm happy to say that if you go to the website, bemyeyes.com/podcasts, all of the episodes also have transcripts as well. So they're all fully accessible. And it's super important to us as well.
What, I guess, and whatever you're able to share, what are, and you're kind of alluding to this, but what's the future of Be My Eyes look like? Obviously, you're not just growing your user base, but you have these ways through the podcast that you're building community around it. Are there any initiatives or new elements to it that you're able to share now that are things that are in the near future, things that you're working on?
Yeah. So I think basically the big step we took in the last year or so was thinking beyond volunteers. And, the volunteer community is amazing, and that's what makes the app run. Well, actually, ultimately,
can you get that?
I don't think so. It's probably a package or something. Ultimately, what makes the app run is actually money, right? So the volunteers don't pay, the users don't pay, and that's really important to us. We don't want anyone benefiting from the app to pay. but we needed to find a business model, and we realized that actually companies had a real desire to connect with the blind and low vision community because they've been so hard to find and to serve historically. And so we went to Microsoft and we said, would you guys like to receive Be My Eyes calls in your disability support center directly through Be My Eyes? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And so that was our first kind of partnership where we actually provide Microsoft customer support in the Be My Eyes app. And we pretty quickly after that expanded to Google and then all these other companies, including a whole umbrella of companies under the Procter & Gamble company, you know, brands like Tide and Mr. Clean and all these other ones. And then this summer when COVID hit, we went to all the blindness organizations and said, would you like to provide customer support to your consumers? So we've got, I think, like going on 50 companies now who are in the Be My Eyes app. It's kind of like if you remember the Yellow Pages, the phone book, you know, like, or like, you know, it's like a listing, you know, the phone book for our blind and low vision users. And it's amazing. You can call and in like 30 seconds, you can be video connected to someone from a company who is an expert at whatever you need help with. And they'll tell you how to fix it. So in the next, you know, upcoming, we're really looking to see how we can leverage the specialized part of the app into giving people totally new experiences, improved access that they never had before, whether that's help with their pets or help with, you know, voting or, you know, I'm kind of teasing some things here, but like, there's a lot of use cases that we'll see in the Be My Eyes app benefiting from having access to an expert as opposed to just a volunteer pair of eyes.
Love that. I love that. I'm going to take a quick pause for an interpreter switch.
Yes.
All right, all set. Great. So yeah, continuing here. Yeah, those are really interesting ideas, and I think, you know, I think just anytime you have an app that has the numbers and the enthusiasm as Be My Eyes does, I think that the sky's the limit. So like, you know, I think all of that and whatever else you guys dream up, I think is probably fair game for you guys. There's the kind of the it seems like the opportunities are limitless there.
I hope so. I hope so. We you know, we are having a founder who's blind. You know, we're pretty committed to our cause, and even though we're not a nonprofit, we're pretty committed to our purpose of providing this free support, and that is and not sort of taking the low-hanging fruit of like bombarding people with advertising or charging people a subscription or all the kind of easy outs that most apps go for to survive. So as a result, it's a very kind of like a critical challenge that we figure out how to fund Be My Eyes sustainably through a business model that works. And I won't lie, it's a challenge, but we're kind of relying on the fact that we do have so much support that you know, good will prevail. We'll find a way to keep it going in one way or another. It's going to be really interesting to see how the business model bears out.
Well, as you continue to crack that code, please fill me in, because I'll be curious to know. I really, you know, feel like a kinship with Be My Eyes in that sense, and like, you know, obviously Feeling Through is not anywhere like on the like user level as a Be My Eyes, but I feel like there's a lot of things in which we're trying to navigate similar spaces around that, and certainly really admire, and also will look for any advice you might have as you continue down that path there. But one
like,
you know,
like new you know, like the new climate is that like ethics and like doing good for the world are equally as important in people's buying decisions as price and all these other factors. So like, I think we're in a time where it's very reasonable to think that a purpose and profit driven company can do well, and the two are not mutually exclusive or at odds with one another. So I have great faith that that's the case.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna join you in that faith there. So that makes two of us. But
Yeah.
I'd love to. So we're both talking to each other from Los Angeles. We actually found out when we first connected that we're essentially neighbors, live a few minutes away from each other. You moved down here pretty recently, right, to Los Angeles?
Yeah, it was about a year ago.
About a year ago. And what can you tell me what brought you to Los Angeles specifically?
I mean, I think I feel a resonance with the energy in Los Angeles. I am pretty social. I'm pretty enthusiastic about meeting new people and exploring different creative outlets and different ideas. And so there's a lot of motivation down here to create. I love that. And even though I'm not sort of industry, like entertainment industry, I, I've always been a storyteller and a writer. And, I was making movies on iMovie when I was 12 years old. Like, I like rendering a story.
If this was,
And
by the way, if this was like like the Tonight Show, I would like embarrass you by going, "Let's cue up one of those movies from when you were 12 years." I wish we had the team to dig that up so we can embarrass you right now.
You don't know how glad I am that you don't have access to those movies. Yeah, I mean, like, and also I have a ton of friends down here. So to me, it was just like a lifestyle move, but also, if I'm being honest, I think that ultimately, the only way we're going to change people's minds about the misconception of disability is by showing them really compelling stories that flip them. And, if you tell a really good story on screen to people, to an unsuspecting viewer, you can flip them almost in one sitting. You can make them think totally differently about someone that they were stereotyping almost in one sitting, especially in the era of the binge watch, right? Like, when you can watch 12 episodes of something without even really pressing the next button. You can totally change someone's mind so that the next time they see a deaf-blind person in public, they don't react with a frown and by looking away. They react with a smile and an interaction, or a smile and they don't even need to help the person or talk to them, just sending good energy their way. I mean, we can feel it. People with canes and stuff, when we walk down the street, we can feel when you're looking at us. We can feel when you fall silent when we pass, and those are the little micro events in our lives that make our lives hard. It's actually not the lack of sight or the inability to do certain things. It's the way we're treated. And I think that probably ultimately whatever changes people's minds about those stereotypes is going to come out of LA, or is going to come out of at least the distribution machine that is based here in LA.
Well, you're definitely speaking our language, the feeling through language for sure, when you talk about the power of storytelling to change perceptions. I mean, that's certainly something that's been...
It sounds corny, right? Like, it at this point, it almost sounds like, not corny, but like obvious or like played. But if you really think about it, it's that's all we have, really, is like our whole lives are stories that we've made up about ourselves. Sorry.
No, I mean, there is a little bit of corniness and cliche to it, but it's definitely, I mean, it's definitely true. And it's something that, I think is obvious to a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of people it's not necessarily obvious to, in the sense they don't necessarily think about or engage with entertainment like that on a regular basis, but it's still happening. I mean, I think even just in the way that you just shared, one of the personally what you're sharing, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, that one of the real challenges for, say, someone who's blind or low vision is not necessarily even like a lack of eyesight, but more just the kind of the microaggressions of like moving through the world on a moment to moment basis and having those kind of like quiet moments of someone kind of treating you differently or whatever that may be. I think that's probably obvious to a lot of people watching, but also completely something that a lot of people watching haven't thought about at all. And kind of the necessity of sharing that and having that kind of, maybe someone hears that today in a way that they have heard someone else kind of say that before, but it hadn't really registered. So in certain ways, it's kind of helpful to like reiterate these things that seem like they're fairly true for a lot of people, but not necessarily how people haven't necessarily ingested it in a way that really changes them in that visceral way.
Yeah, but you can't spoon feed it to people. That's the problem. Is that like you can't empathy train someone's gut reaction to fall silent when a blind person walks down the street. That's their like impulse. And you can't just have a nice, YouTube discussion where someone says you really shouldn't do that and then have them not do that anymore. That's not going to work. What you need to have is someone kick back on their couch and enjoy a story about someone who is like that and have their mind change in a really profound way, so that the next time they see someone like that on the street, their impulse is different. Their unconscious reaction is different. They can change their I feel like a lot of empathy training is about changing people's like conscious reactions about like, okay, I know how to do this. Here's the steps that I take when I see this person. Here's how to properly guide a blind person down the street. What I'm trying to change is like the lizard brain reaction to people with disabilities, and to make people actually feel joy, feel pleasant, feel unthreatened, feel not pitying when they see someone with a disability, because that is what actually breaks the negative feedback loop and creates real advancement.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think what I noticed is some of this empathy training to be that you described versus, say, the experience of getting engaged with a story. The difference, like you're saying, is that engaging kind of this conscious mind versus this deeper unconscious mind. And I think, with storytelling, that and particularly like watching like a film or TV, it's because rather than like still being that separation where I'm over here and you're over there and I'm like learning more about that person over there, a story allows you and in a lot of ways forces you to climb inside of someone else's experience and really have like a much deeper, approximate in a more visceral way what someone else's experience is like, from more of like the inside rather than the outside looking over to someone else that's very separate. And I think that's where a lot of the power of storytelling lies, to change these like deeper subconscious beliefs or reactions to things.
We're all very used to being bombarded with advertising. Most of us are pretty used to the school setting and what it's like to be lectured to. We've all seen plenty of TED Talks. So our ability to filter out information that is being spoon-fed to us and like take what we like and leave what we don't, and impart our political beliefs on it and do this and then mix it with a little bit of that and inject this and create our own little weird dish is pretty well honed. But what we don't have honed as well is our reaction to a really well told story. A really good story, frankly, can be dangerous, just as dangerous as it is powerful, because it grips you, it takes you for a ride, and it can change your mind. It's like, I'm not going to be able to feel I'm not going to be able to go back to what I thought about deafblindness. You know, I've interacted with plenty of deafblind people in my life, but feeling through did change my mind about it in some subtle ways. And I'm not going to be able to go back to what I did, what I thought about deafblindness before I watched the movie, like it or not. And like, and I think what you show is really positive, but that's also why our filmmakers have a tremendous responsibility, is because if they misportray blindness or deaf blindness or deafness or disability in general, they can do a ton of damage, like a ton of damage, and they can set back the entire population of people with disabilities hundreds of thousands of years if they want to, you know, with just one terrible character or one kind of thoughtless maneuver in a story.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love that you bring up responsibility. You know, that's something that's definitely really important to like what we, you know, did with Feeling Through and what we try to do with our platform. But, and I'm not, you know, certainly far from doing everything perfect. I'm definitely the first person to say that, but that responsibility you have to do your best to be extremely conscientious of the message that you're putting out and the potential impact that it has on people is absolutely imperative. And I'm someone who, like, you know, maybe I'm a little bit more to the extreme of that as like a social impact filmmaker, like that's very much interwoven into the whole reason why I would choose to tell a story in the first place. But with that said, I think it applies to everything. You could have like a complete slapstick comedy, but there's still a responsibility in there, right? And that doesn't even mean you can't poke fun at something, right? Like I one of the podcasts that I listened to, you had a blind comedian on there, and obviously a lot of his humor is, but it's like you're doing it there's still like a clever kind of meta way to do that, where you can be poking fun at yourself and empowering yourself, or you can be poking fun at yourself and kind of holding up erroneous myths that people have to kind of like laugh at it, but also have to examine it in a way. So there's the responsibility is in everything, and so much of like, I'm maybe again a little too far to one side of the spectrum, but there's so much that I see on TV, on YouTube, what have you, where I'm like, I watch it, I'm like, just knowing how much time and energy it takes to make something, and I'm like, why did someone choose to make that? Like, why did someone choose to put all their time and energy into this thing that like could be like that thing that you're saying that's like could be like varying degrees of like harmful, but at the very least like a net zero gain at best, where it's like, what is that really? And look, I'm not someone who says not every piece of entertainment or thing we watch needs to like change the world, or like, you know what I mean, make the world a better place, which is something that like I love the ongoing joke in what's it called on HBO, where they're in Silicon Valley, where the running joke is everyone in Silicon Valley is creating an app that's going to change the world, right? And like make the world a better place. I'm not saying everything needs to do that, but there still is a responsibility in everything and anything you put out, particularly for those who have a platform where it's going to reach tons of people. And that's something we think about a lot. And I'm glad you are bringing it up, because I think it's something that maybe there's a lot of people who maybe don't create content that haven't necessarily sat with that part of it or thought about it, but it's a really, really important thing for everyone to be aware of, because it's not just for the content creators, but it's also the content receivers, and having this awareness of what, you know, maybe getting a message from something and being like, I don't necessarily know a lot about the deaf blind community or the blind or low vision community, but there's something about that maybe feels a little off. Like, I'm going to kind of do my own research there, because this thing I don't really know why, but it's not sitting with me in the right way. And I want to look into this topic myself more, so that I don't feel like I'm overly influenced by this thing I just saw, or whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think people with disabilities are often kind of like last in line when it comes to like social justice issues. I think it's because disability brings up a lot of issues around our mortality that scare people. And so it's a little easier to rally around other identity related aspects of identity that are less about like your body falling apart or whatever. And so, so I think like as a result, other groups are a little further along, and like um you wouldn't write a film with like a Native American character and just be like, oh, I'm just gonna like make up like everything about like the way he talks and the way he dresses and the way he looks and the stuff he says about being Native American. I'm just gonna like wing it. Most people these days, like some people might do that, but most people would be like, no, maybe I should like read a book or like.
Some people will definitely still do that though, for sure.
Unfortunately, but we've made a lot of progress on there, and people will catch heat if they do that, right? At least you'll at least catch heat. There is like no one will bat an eyelash if someone did that with a blind character. People think of blind characters and deafblind characters as like these mythic creatures, and like we're not mythic creatures. Like we're like totally real people fighting for our survival and our existence, just like everybody else. And there's like 30 to, depending on how you slice it, there's like 30 to 50 million of us in the United States alone, just trying to fit into this society. So when you just like paint with a really broad brush and just like improvise like a representation, you're screwing us over. Like in the same way that you'd be screwing over, any other group that you just decided you were going to kind of like, you were going to just, make up your own creative version of. So I don't know. I'm the last person in the world who wants to sit around watching, like only, like, no offense, but like only like documentaries about social good. I don't think you would want that either. Like you serve a role in a broader, ecosystem. But, because we don't want just one note, everything to be, but it's not about whether the story is uplifting or not. You could make a socially responsible horror, movie, right? Like, and if you look at some of the stuff from like Parasite and Get Out and all these things, like these are like thrillers or horrors or whatever they are. Like they're not uplifting per se, but they're socially responsible and they have a social impact that is significant. So you go that route too, Doug.
I certainly not that's something I would certainly consider. And I think what you're bringing up too, those are examples, aside from like genre or what the story is, those are creators who have something to say and are using various genre components to tell that thing. But it's like, I think it's like, what is at the basement of that? The bottom of that is someone who has something to say and something that's really important to say. And you can say it in any number of ways, right? You can say it in this thing that's very, very much this clearly like meant to be like this moving, sentimental thing. You can say it in a way that's funny and absurd, or in a way that's scary or whatever that is. But I think I know that for me, I'm not drawn to, I don't really, when people are like, oh, what's your favorite like genre type of movie? I don't necessarily have one. I'm more just drawn to people who are creating something that have something to say and have like spent the time to really think about it in a way that makes it like a worthwhile thing to say, whatever that is. Really, I don't like, I think there's as many people in the world there are like valid things to say. It's just people actually take the time to have it generated from that place. And certainly, entertainment business is a business like anything else. So there's a lot of things that come from the other direction of like, okay, like, for whatever algorithm or business model we have, we think this kind of thing is going to do really well, box office wise, money wise, and we'll just work our way backwards and just create something around that. And here you go. It's a business. Like, of course that's going to happen too. But, I think what's, though we haven't necessarily seen it reflected in the numbers yet, what's great about what's happening right now is that there's at least, and a lot of it is having, like, say, Hollywood have its arm twisted a little bit in, like, Oscars So White and things of, like, really calling out the lack of representation and inclusion. But what that's at least created is an environment where, the industry at least feels like it has to do something, and hopefully things will follow suit. to as recently as I think it was yesterday. I don't know if you saw the Oscars starting in 2024, and I think there's a little lead up to it. There will be an inclusion requirement to be able to be nominated for Best Picture. So you can imagine how that'll, for those who maybe aren't inclined to do that anyway, will really force the hand of people to have to be more inclusive, and disability is included in that, as well as ethnicity, and some other categories. So, these are things that are fortunately more in the forefront of people's minds now, even if it's just kind of like for political reasons to like not come off as, the bad guy or what have you, but some tangible change, particularly recently, nonetheless. And it's important.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm no like purist about like, oh, like only a blind actor can play a blind role, or only a blind writer can write a story about blindness. But just because with the sheer amount of great stories about blindness out there, there's not enough blind writers and actors yet to serve the number of valid stories that should be told. But if I were running a studio, I would sure as hell make sure that anyone who was pitching me anything had done their due diligence. Because as running a network or a studio, I don't want to greenlight something that is going to, whether it's a horror movie or a documentary, I don't want to greenlight something that is gonna do damage to a group of people, or get me in trouble, or whatever it might be.
Is there, are there any particular stories that you want to see, or things that like specifically come to mind that like don't exist, or that you haven't seen enough of that you'd like to see?
Well, it's really interesting because we're starting to get this amazing steady stream of, what would you call them? Like, I should have thought of a term in advance, but like otherness comedies. You know what I mean? Like, you've got like Hulu's doing great. They've got like Rami and Shrill. HBO's got some great stuff. Like, there's all these comedies that are kind of like, here's how my identity makes me feel othered, and here's how I'm dealing with it. And they're very like kind of driven by the writer director type, who then sort of stars in it or something. They're like, and this is like a whole genre, and I think they're great. I watch them all. I like take them as like a mold, and like I think there needs to be more of that, but that's gonna get old pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And people are gonna be like, oh, it's another one of these, like, here's how I'm different than everyone else, the world is bearing down on me comedies. And I don't want to sound callous, but it's like, we're going to ratchet through a lot of groups, and some of them aren't going to nail it, and they're going to become more and more watered down, and then suddenly it's going to be this thing of one person, like, oh, we already did the the Muslim otherness comedy, like, can't greenlight another Rami because we've already like got our Rami. Can't greenlight another A.D. Bryant because we did Shrill. And that's damaging too, because there's like, this isn't about like doing a fill in the blank story. It's about making room for more human stories.
Totally.
So I worry a little bit about that. And so we need people to be a little more creative when they're writing now, to think, how do we make really good stories with really diverse characters that aren't explicitly or implicitly doing that relatively now formulaic thing of trying to make the viewer relate to that otherness.
Well, and that gets to the point of like, what I think a lot of, inclusivity and diversity become very much like buzzwords that start to like really lose meaning when you're talking in anything, but like if we're talking about a media, but like when you kind of like, work that down to the foundation of it, like what's really important and an extension of what you're saying is getting to a point where these traditionally marginalized communities, whichever they may be, and we're focusing on disability right now, but obviously it could be, we could be talking about various like ethnicities and any marginalized group, is getting to the point where, first of all, having any representation, right, for groups that aren't represented at all. I mean, in our case, Feeling Through is the first film to star a deafblind actor, a first, like a literal first, right? The next step of that is to have more, but like because I'll use the deafblind community as an example because of Feeling Through. So Feeling Through is the first. So obviously the first that's very important to the whole ethos and kind of the buzz and or marketing and or coming into Feeling Through is also having that relationship to the fact that it's a first. Then the next one or other stories in that space fortunately won't be the first, but it'll still be one of the only representations of the deafblind community, right? And so there's still really this like, there's so little context for most people because of it being a community that's so underrepresented that you're still very much in conversation with and aware of that complete lack of representation. And then if you walk that out far enough, the hope is you can have a deafblind character in any role, right? That like where it's not so it doesn't always need to be about so much about their deafblindness, right? And you can kind of walk that out with anything. And the hope is, like using Rami as an example, which is a great show that, and obviously being really important that it's like the first representation of like a Muslim American family and kind of like all the ways in which, storylines which they go down in that. And then Rami becomes a big enough star where Rami isn't just like the Muslim American dude in this thing, but he's like leading a movie or a TV show that's not even about that really. And then hopefully paves the way for more, Muslim Americans to not be in shows that are just about them being Muslim American. That's kind of like the hope there, right? It's kind of like we're so not close to that in a lot of ways, but I think that's ultimately kind of the hope when you're really boiling down representation.
Well, America, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, Hollywood, like they're always going to try to put us in a box, and you have to be wary of that, even if it's a nice, cushy, inclusive box. And so we just have to fight that. And I'm not worried anymore about whether representation is coming. It's coming. I'm more worried about how it's going to be commodified and packaged, and I don't want us to be vacuum sealed in a kind of boring little corner of media that there's a concept called a disabled that Georgina Klieg wrote about, and others I think have written about it as well, called a disabled arts ghetto. And it's like this is like mainstream art, and this is like disabled art. And I worry that we're going to create some version of that every time we do something like the Oscars makes a big thing about inclusivity, or Hulu starts greenlighting more woke shows. It's a huge step forward, and I hope that it just means more integration and more blurring the lines of what is a socially responsible show and what is not, or what is good for people and what is not. But I do worry at times too that we're going to just sort of that it's just going to be commodified and co-opted by corporate interests to sell more, products or what have you, because you're already seeing that across advertising, woke advertising and all this stuff. And it's going to make us cynical about inclusion. We're going to become cynical about inclusion, and then we're going to backslide because we're going to be like, oh, I'm not going to, I'm too savvy to be tricked by that.
Well, when you're the studio head of the the studio division of Be My Eyes. You're certainly going to lead the charge against that. But on that note, we are out of time for today. And normally this is, after a great conversation like this is where I would like twist your arm to come back and join me again, which I still will. But you're joining me tomorrow for the Feeling Through Experience, the panel portion of the Feeling Through Experience. For all of you watching again, that will be tomorrow, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can go straight to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/feelingthrough. You'll see the event is already up there. You can set a reminder, tell all your friends, everyone you've ever met. We'll see you tomorrow. And Will, I'm excited to get to talk to you 2 days in a row. This is a treat for me.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch the movie. It's going to be great.
Right on. Well,
thanks so much. I
really
thank
appreciate
it.
And thanks for everyone tuning in. And for Feeling Through Live, we'll see you obviously next Friday, but also see y'all tomorrow for the Feeling Through Experience. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Jamie.